True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. For those of you new and just now joining us, this show is very much a fact-based investigative show. We love to have really amazing, competent guests on to discuss different true crime that's going on, missing people, and so on and so forth. But we really like to take a deep dive and analyze things from an investigative perspective, as well as a legal perspective and a psychological perspective. We're going to be focusing on the legalities concerning Madeline Soto and the statement made by Jennifer Soto that just hit late last week when Chasing Paper found out the details and actually sent that to me, and then he presented it on his live regarding a derivative immunity interview. And so we're going to hone in on that. Got so much to say and so much we're going to discuss. I want to have you all welcome to the stage, if you will, Dave Ehrenberg. I couldn't think of a better person to ask if he would help me break this down than Dave. First of all, he was a former Florida state senator. In addition, now he is a Florida state attorney. Who better to understand all of this than Dave? So without further ado, here we go.
Jennifer.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Jennifer, great to be back with you.
Yes, thank you. I'm always honored and thrilled to have you. I know you've been paying close attention to this Soto case. It so affects your state in so many ways, especially the death penalty, but we'll get into that later. So the big breaking news was a interview that was done clear back in April, and they gave derivative immunity to Jennifer Soto to talk about the details of what happened on February 25th and 26th. Can you break down for us, what does that mean, derivative immunity?
Yeah, Jennifer, derivative use immunity is a legal protection that limits the government from using a witness's testimony or any evidence derived from that testimony against that witness in a criminal prosecution. If the witness lies, yes, they can be prosecuted for perjury, but you can't use the stuff that they say against that witness. It's a like a get out of jail free card just for that testimony. But if the prosecution and law enforcement can develop the evidence against that person independently, then it's game on. So it's not as broad as transactional immunity. That's the gold standard. If you are a defense lawyer, you want to give your client transactional immunity, means they cannot be prosecuted for the entire thing, the entire transaction, the subject to which they're talking about. When it comes to derivative use immunity, you can still be prosecuted, but just not based on what you said right then and there.
So let's get into that. I was thinking about, all the facts, all the details. We know so much from all the reports that have been released. We've seen so much introduced in terms of the autopsy. We know exactly that Madeline Soto was viciously strangled. We know that she suffered sexual abuse for 2 years, and she had just turned 13. So years of sexual abuse. It's been all laid out. To me, this is one of those cases that I call a whale in a bucket. That might be a federal term. Maybe you all used it too. Why in the world do you think they felt they needed to give her derivative use immunity?
This was back in April, Jennifer. So they were still hot on the trail of looking for who was guilty, whether it was the defendant in this case, Stefan, or others, and they wanted to know what she knew. And they could not compel her to testify. They could not force her to speak because she's got the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But they needed and wanted her testimony. And so they said, okay, just tell us everything you know. And based on what you tell us, we're not going to prosecute you unless we can find that evidence independently. So we're really focused on Stefan. Now, if she were the big fish here, they would not have given her that immunity. But Stefan is the big fish. I share a little bit of your skepticism. I know I've seen your tweets. By the way, I don't call it by its new name. I call it Twitter. But I've seen your tweets, and I get the skepticism that perhaps they didn't need to give her this immunity because they had so much evidence against Stefan. And I can understand that. But remember, this was back in April, and it doesn't mean that she won't be prosecuted. And based on her answers, boy, it does seem like she was being a little evasive. She looked like she was still trying to protect this cretin who was living with her, still trying to defend him as a good person who he, who she trusted. And it really made her look bad. I thought in that interview, she looked really bad.
I thought so too, especially when she was having issues saying we, and then going back to I. She did that a couple of times. Actually, the detective goes back and even points that out. But the biggest thing that stuck out to me, as I'm getting at an hour and 9 minutes and the interview ended, I could not believe the questions that weren't asked. Mm-hmm. And this is why I think, Dave, they are really still considering prosecuting her, because there was a lot they didn't ask in terms of everything leading up to, everything about the sexual abuse, everything about those 2 years, all the details concerning all of this. And I know they were on a huge timeline too, which is something for me when in the federal system, we always say we proffer somebody. When we give somebody that proffer situation and I'm interviewing them, these go on for hours typically, sometimes days, sometimes even 2 days. What did you make of the limited session and the limited questioning?
Yeah, the lawyer for Ms. Soto was telling the prosecution to wrap it up. Remember, towards the end, it's like, hey, let's finish this. And I think it was because they made a deal. And you heard it at the beginning of the interview where the prosecution said, we think this will last about an hour and a half. And the defense lawyer kept the prosecutor to that. So I think the reason why the prosecution, which could have gone longer, remember, she doesn't have the Fifth Amendment to protect her when the prosecution immunizes her. There's no threat of self-incrimination when you cannot be incriminated by what you said. But I think the reason why they cut it short was exactly what you said. I still think she is still potentially in the crosshairs of prosecutors. And if they asked her too many questions, that could harm their future case against her, because then she can argue, no, you prosecuted me because of what I said. I told you all this stuff, and that's the subject of this charge. And then the prosecution has to explain why they developed all this evidence independently. Then it's up to a judge. The judge could just throw it out. So I think you are right as the reason why it is short, and they deferred to the defense lawyer's rules. Only going to ask you an hour and a half. They limited what they asked because I still think she could be charged.
Yeah, it seemed like they were really focusing in a lot about the linens, the bedding. That was something they really wanted to get to, the clothing that was worn by both Stearns and Madeline, all those little details. And I was listening to her first interview that was to a media station, a television station, where she specifically says she's in this great green sweatshirt. She even describes white Crocs and black shorts. I thought it was very interesting on this immunity session where she says, I have no idea.
There were a lot of interesting answers to that. She was unaware of a lot of things, as she said, but there were some things that you think perhaps she put her head in the sand. She didn't want to really go to answer about why she let her daughter sleep with this guy. They asked her, and she said all she would say is, well, I trusted him. Even after they broke up, he would still stay over because he needed a place to stay, and he's just a good friend. He's just a good friend. And like, really, this guy is a cretin. This guy had child pornography on his phone. He strangled your daughter to death, and this is how you talk about him? So if you wonder why you had such a horrific death of poor Madeline Soto, you can see why, because you had a mother who I believe engaged in child neglect. Now, whether she'll be charged with that, whether prosecutors have the goods to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, we'll see. But she did not come across well in that interview.
Well, the things that I think they can get her on, and as I mentioned right before we came on, there was no more interesting times that I can look back on, other than, of course, arresting people and all of that. But sitting across from an AUSA and hashing out a case, going forward with the facts, giving them like pros memo saying, listen, we need to go after this guy or gal because XYZ, and kind of going all over all that. Now, I was super lucky. I think I had the best AUSAs ever in all of Texas, and it was amazing. But I want to present to you this. Why in the world, Dave, can we not prosecute 1001, at least that's the federal statute, false statements? Because she specifically said it. She was so specific in the earlier interview that she was with him when they dropped off Madeline that morning.
Well,
false statement, proved independently.
If she lied, and then the feds take that seriously, as you know, Jennifer. I mean, that's why Martha Stewart went to prison. It wasn't because of insider trading; it's because she lied to investigators. They hate that, and you could face serious prison time for that. That's what you're referring to, your 1001 violation. But they said to her at the beginning that if you just tell the truth now, and if you have some inconsistencies with something you said previously, we're not going to prosecute you for that. You notice how they said that at the beginning. They sort of, like water under the bridge. Just tell us the truth now. So if she lied at that interview, at the interview that we witnessed, the one from April, then they could indeed prosecute her. But based on what they said at the beginning of that interview, if they have now proven that she lied early on, I think they're going to let it go.
Right. So not talking about the interview that just took place in April, but rather the one that took place clear back in February, when she said that she dropped off Madeline Soto and gave very specific facts. Why can't that be used? Because, of course, independently, they can prove through video surveillance, through the records from where she was, so on and so forth. They can totally independent make that 1001 case.
Well, did she tell that to the feds or to state officials?
She told that. So I keep saying 1001. What's the Florida statute that you all use when people lie?
Oh, it's obstruction. You're going to ask me specific statute numbers. Thank you.
No, it's okay. But you use an obstruction statute. So
right,
why couldn't they
but
use
it's not treated as seriously as the feds. The feds will put you in prison for 10 years, but it's not as treated as seriously. And that's why the investigator, when they interviewed her in the April call, the April interview, the one we just watched or listened to, they said, hey, it's just a misdemeanor. If you want to just come clean now, tell us everything now, and we'll let everything previously slide. So they're telling her that as long as you tell the truth now, we're not going to go after you for misleading statements earlier on. Could they have done so? Yes. But at the state level, it's just not prosecuted in the way that the feds do.
See, that definitely wasn't translating to me, because I thought no matter what, they can get her on this false statement / obstruction. But it sounds like it just doesn't have the teeth the feds have, so they're not going to pursue it.
Yeah, and they wanted her to come clean in the April interview, and then it gets into interesting issues of immunity. If you then are telling the truth now, would they go back and say, okay, now based on what you said, now we know you were lying previously, and we're going to prosecute you? That would rub up against the whole derivative use immunity that she was given. So do not expect her to be prosecuted for previous lies, as long as she told the truth in that statement in April. If she lied in that April statement, then she's going down. If she lies since the April statement, then she'd be going down. But because of what she said at the beginning was misleading, they're going to give her a pass.
Okay. That was one that I was really hanging my hat on. Okay. Let me ask you this, though. What about the simple obstruction? Everything she was telling them to sort of mislead law enforcement, oh, I have no idea what happened. I don't know, just the song and dance really from the very beginning about having no idea, but yet covering. Is there no way to get an aiding and abetting or obstruction charge regarding those actions?
Aiding and abetting is interesting. You'd have to know that the crime was committed and then try to take overt action to prevent the person from being arrested or to help that person flee. And if you can prove that, that's a separate crime. But it looks like here that prosecutors just want to use her testimony to seal the deal in prosecuting Stefan Stearns. And If she lies continually, then yeah, that'll come back to haunt her. But it looks like the only possible charge to me, in my mind, that the prosecutors here are setting themselves up for is a potential child neglect charge. And you can tell by the way they asked the questions. They avoided getting into too much detail about her potential child neglect. That is a felony in Florida when it leads to a death. So they avoided that for a reason. As you said at the beginning of our interview, I think they avoided that so they could potentially still charge her later on. So I think that's where they're going. I don't think they're going in the direction of obstruction here as much as the more serious charge of child neglect leading to a death. Uh, they're still developing the case. They could still, the statute of limitations isn't running out anytime soon, so they could still bring those charges. But they want her to testify against Stearns on the stand. They want some leverage against her. And that would be their leverage, I think, to say, if you're not going to cooperate, we're going to charge you with a crime.
Dave, I don't know about you with this case, but from the get-go, from her first interview, it was so blatantly obvious, really, to anyone that she was lying. The statements she gave, how she gave them, it was just a beacon for somebody not telling the truth, as was Stearns. He couldn't even look the camera in the eye. He looked down to the left the whole time, or to the right, I believe, the whole entire time. But my point is, with her, how could they not be focusing on the child neglect, as you said, the sexual abuse that basically, in a sense, she was a possible party to? Yeah. I mean, what do you think, Dave? Do you think they'll charge?
Oh, yeah, I thought perhaps earlier they would, but the longer this goes, it makes it a little less likely. The longer this sits out there, I think if she cooperates fully against Stearns, she could avoid the charge. I'm not privy to all the evidence the law enforcement and prosecutors have up there in Orlando, so it's hard to say. I do think they would have a case though against her. I mean, just by her answers, she was still backing Stearns up. She was saying, yes, Maddie likes to sleep with someone. She slept with my mom when she would go to her mother's house. And even though she was a teenager, she needed someone to sleep in the bed with her. So she was still trying to justify it, what she did. I think, though, in her favor, I think the video where they go and they're talking, I think it was the insurance office where Stearns is like standing a couple feet behind her and to the side. It almost looked like a hostage video where you have the mother talking on camera, not knowing she was being recorded, but talking. And it looked like he was there monitoring her and making sure she said the right thing. So that could gain her some sympathy in front of a jury where it looks like she was under his control. And that would be her defense. She was a damsel in distress who was under the control of this terrible, awful, bullying, murderous child molester. That's her defense. So that's why prosecutors, if they're going to charge her, need to make sure they have all the goods, make sure this is an airtight case, because you don't want to lose that prosecution, especially if you do charge her and she goes to trial. She's not going to cooperate with you against Stearns.
So what do you make of, there were two things that I found very interesting. Do you remember when she said she didn't, or she felt uncomfortable having her go with her own biological father? Something about, I don't want cameras to be used to look at her when she's going to the bathroom, or, males around her. And then she said the same thing about having her ever spend the night with a buddy, with her best friend. Well, I don't know what boys are there, brothers or fathers, what they might do to her. Did you find that totally odd?
I totally did. I thought that was very odd. How specific to make that kind of question to your ex, the father of your daughter, to say, I don't want this, make sure this doesn't happen. That's a request so specific. It's like, that seems like it's happened before. But now her explanation on that video was that after she couldn't remember why she said it. At first she said, I don't know why I wrote that. Right. And then she came back and I remember that I read something about an airline, and there was this young person, a child, who was flying alone on an airline, and the airline, an attendant, put a camera somewhere in the bathroom or under the seat or something. And that's why I was worried about that. So I brought that up. But, if that was really on top of her mind, why didn't she mention it to begin with? That was something she thought about and had to recollect after she had first said, I don't know why I said that. That would seem to be something you'd remember.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when I saw that, this video and listened to it over and over, she seemed much more maniacal than I initially thought. I mean, I initially thought, yes, she's a liar. Yes, she's covering up. Maybe she's being, manipulated. But with those sorts of things, to me, she was describing what she absolutely knew was happening to Maddie by Stefan. And she was just deflecting it over on these other situations. That's how I took it. Somebody with a guilty conscience, uh, you know, having that seep in their decision making, or what she had to say in that interview.
I'm with you, Jennifer. I felt the same way about her. I felt worse about her after I heard the interview. She didn't seem as broken up as I thought she would be. I thought she'd be really devastated at the loss of her daughter. And, people grieve in different ways. But it seemed like she was bending over backwards to still defend Stefan Stearns in that interview. Now, in part, you do that to protect yourself. You're trying to justify your actions because if you say the wrong thing, you think you'd be prosecuted for child neglect. But on the other hand, you were just given immunity. So speak freely. And she didn't seem like she was speaking so freely. She seemed like she was still holding something back. And remember, there was a part of that interview where they asked her a question and she was hemming and hawing. And the law enforcement interviewer said, we have your phone. So we know the truth here. So you should speak truthfully because we don't want to have to prosecute you. I mean, it was something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing, but you can see law enforcement didn't totally believe her either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was surprised to see law enforcement sort of do that. I wanted them to keep giving her the rope to hang herself because she was slowly hanging herself. And then he kind of rescues her with that statement, which I did find interesting as well. Where do you think things head from here in terms of the death penalty if he's convicted of these crimes?
I think he's getting the death penalty. Florida made it a lot easier to get the death penalty. Number one, you don't even need a death anymore. If it's child molestation, you can get the death penalty, even if the child is alive. And here the child sadly is dead. And so he could get it either for the murder of Madeline Soto or the molestation of her. So you can get it either way. Plus, in Florida, we now have the easiest death penalty to administer, meaning you only need an 8-4 vote. If you're a defendant, it doesn't have to be unanimous in the penalty phase. It just needs to be 8-4, which is the lowest of any state in the country. And I don't know if that's going to be upheld as constitutional by the Supreme Court under the 8th Amendment, but that's the new law in Florida that was passed after the Parkland massacre, and Nicholas Cruz avoided the death penalty by 9-3 votes. The Florida legislature said 8-4. So this case is headed towards a guilty verdict and the death penalty. I think the bigger question is what's going to happen to her mom.
Yes, that is the huge question. And I just can't believe that they're going to take a pass on not charging her with the child neglect type of charges because I think they have such a rock solid case right now. I just don't think they need her, especially when we saw what she had to say.
Yeah, on that, I agree with you, Jennifer. I think they've got such a good case against Stearns. I mean, they found the child porn on his phone. The jury's going to hate this guy. He was the last one seen with her. The evidence, all his story didn't pan out. I did think they got some good information from her when she talked about how he had all these excuses why. Oh, he left his phone at home again. Oh, all of a sudden my phone reset. I don't know what happened. I pushed the button. I mean, and she was believing all this stuff, but no one else would believe it when all these reasons why, he didn't have his phone with him and he was stuck on the side of the road and he dropped Maddie off so early to school. Well, we were just early. I don't know. I was going to take her to McDonald's. I mean, none of this stuff adds up. They got him dead to rights. So I'm with you that I don't think they need her testimony, but, we're not privy to everything that the prosecutors and law enforcement are privy to. Plus, they still could charge her. They could just be waiting till they really get the goods to where there's no doubt should be convicted. Because remember, it's not probable cause that's our standard for prosecutors to charge cases. It's can you get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt? So Matt, that's why they perhaps are waiting a little longer.
Well, and I'm so glad you said that because I know a lot of people don't necessarily understand that the probable cause, yes, it's a probable cause affidavit, but the real conversation between investigator and prosecutor, and then you as a prosecutor, your decision is going to be based on, can I get a conviction? And if I can't, I am not bringing this forward and trying to get it either an indictment or charge via criminal complaint or information.
That's right. And you want to get as much information as you can out of her against Stearns before you would charge her with a crime. And then since you gave her immunity in April, the investigation would take longer. You can't base on what she said. And if what she said overlaps with what you found, you better be damn sure that that external evidence will convince a judge that you did not have to rely on what she said. That'll blow up the whole case. So that's another reason why this thing could be taking longer. But I'm with you. I think if they wanted to charge with child neglect leading to a death, yeah, that you could do it. But again, where you don't know everything that the prosecutors and law enforcement knows.
Right. We can't really get out our crystal ball, even though from what we see, it seems like there could be a pathway to that. But let me ask you this, because I think you will know this answer. You as a prosecutor, how long are you looking at this dragging out now? I mean, we're getting 8 months out now. Where are you thinking in terms of if they don't charge, that's sort of what you would see as maybe the cutoff?
They have until the statute of limitations runs out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know offhand what it is, 3-4 years for child neglect. I don't know offhand, but whatever the statute of limitations runs out, that's their ticking clock. Stearns' trial would go first because he's already been charged. He's in the process. So I think that'll happen. I think they hope that she'll testify against him. They're going to see how she behaves. I think they're going to see what other evidence they have. And, the more stuff that comes out that's damning against her, they'll be left with no choice, because to see this poor innocent girl murdered in such a horrific way and to be sexually abused over time, I mean, people want to know, what about the mother? And the mother for a while was trying to pretend ignorance. I didn't know anything. I'm a victim too. Well, after you listen to that recording, that interview, ooh, she comes across a lot less sympathetically than I think a lot of people thought she would.
Well, you know what, Dave? I'm holding out. I really think that they're going to charge her. And again, what I really base that on is what they didn't ask her at that interview. That was just, look up here. Why aren't you talking about this? So I still have hope. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. I just can't thank you enough. Can I ask you one more question, though?
Sure.
On the subject really quick, because the school shooting, I think, is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And we know with Parkland, there were a lot of changes made. You talked about one, the 8-4 on the death penalty, but the other change that was made that I thought was interesting, the red flag laws that started after Parkland, and Georgia doesn't have them. What do you think about red flag and their use in the future?
I'm a huge supporter of red flag laws. Red flag laws could have averted the tragedy in Georgia. Red flag laws are helping the state of Florida. We just used it just in a case I'm not allowed to talk about because it's a pending matter, but it just happened this week in a case that the community is very upset about someone potentially committing a horrible crime, and now that person's guns are being taken away and ammunition. And it's only temporarily. There's due process. But if someone poses a significant risk to himself or others, then law enforcement can remove the guns and ammunition from that person for 2 weeks. And then you go to a court and then try to get it for a year. And then you can, if you're the defendant, if you're the person whose guns are removed, you get a right to go have a lawyer and contest it. But do you know that most of these red flag cases are not contested? And so it works 5 times a day. It's used in Florida. And we're a red state that has very loose gun laws, but we have that. If this had existed in Georgia, then as soon as there was an incident with this kid, they could have taken the guns and ammunition away from them, and then he wouldn't have had access to it, and 4 people would have been alive today that are now gone. So yes, I'm a big supporter of red flag laws. The only reason why they don't exist in all 50 states is because the NRA has generated opposition to it as some violation of your Second Amendment right. But come on, there's due process. It only applies when someone pose a significant threat to themselves or others. And you've got to prove it with clear and convincing evidence. So it's a high burden, but it's done every day in Florida and other states.
Man, I just absolutely agree with everything you said there. And obviously, I'm very pro Second Amendment for being able to protect yourself in this way. But exactly, it's a high burden. There's absolutely no Second Amendment violation, for heaven's sakes. And then finally, on this note, what about terroristic threats, Dave? I've seen 6 cases so far. I've been trying to monitor pretty close. 4 in Georgia, 1 in Michigan, I think 1 in Florida, charging terroristic threats. In other words, finally, when you call up and you say, I'm going to blow up your school, instead of just saying, don't do this anymore, you go out and you arrest them. What are your thoughts there?
I love that. Yes. In fact, I think that was used in Michigan with the Crumbly case against the shooter, the killer, Ethan Crumbly. So it's been used in case of school shootings. And I think that holds water. Yes. If you are terrorizing a school, you should be charged with terroristic threats. That's the whole purpose of some of these threats. You're trying to create great harm in people. And if you do so, that statute should be used. I think prosecutors need to do more to try to stop these school shootings. And they are, by charging the parents. They could also charge with these serious crimes before a tragedy occurs, because it looks like the legislatures are not doing their part. That's why it's up to prosecutors. Legislatures need to pass red flag laws and other measures. But until that happens, the prosecutors will keep doing what we can at the local level.
Dave, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You always just enlighten us, and just love having you on the show, and hope to see you on News Nation soon. I'm sure I'll see you with Cuomo soon. And thank you for everything.
Supposed to be on tonight, Jennifer. We'll see if that happens. And hopefully I'll be on with you. I always love being on with you because you and I take on the defense lawyers on TV. I love having you on my side.
I love to be there. All right, Dave, till next time. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to Break the Case. I thought this was a really robust discussion. I want to take a quick look and make sure I didn't miss any questions that might have come through. Yeah, mostly just talking about specifically your support of some of the discussion we had. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you again to Dave Ehrenberg for being part of our show. Really, really love having him on. If there is an attorney, criminal psychologist, another law enforcement person that you would like to see on the show for discussion, please DM me on Twitter, or you can message one of the shows. For some reason, the live chat, I don't know why, but it doesn't translate over to the show. So after each show, I try to look at all the chat, but I really do pay attention to your feedback and listen to what you all say, because you guys are just greater minds. You've been watching true crime. You're what I call the jurors, right? Jurors that are selected are people just like you. And why in the world wouldn't a former law enforcement officer, a prosecutor listen to what you all have to say? I just find it so important. So please leave any messages, any suggestions you might have. I always say, I know we're kind of just starting out, we're getting out of the gate, but the quality of the people that watch the show and that are in the chat and that give to the discussion are just amazing. So my hat's off to each of you. And until the next time, may justice be served, especially against Jennifer Soto. Bye all.